I now have a few different squads for my chapter, each of which is a pretty unique conversion in their own right, but now I've got an Apothecarian Rhino, a conversion that has never been done before. So I think now's a pretty good time to build someone special to lead this converted force. Gentlemen, welcome to Conversion Beam. Today we're going to be taking the Black Templar's Marshal, and we're going to be turning him into a Primaris captain that will look good in the colors of any chapter. Most of this conversion can be done with just the Templar Marshal and the Blade Guard Primaris captain, but you'll see throughout the video I dip into the bits box a little bit to make him a bit more unique to my chapter. The first step to this conversion will be clipping away the body, followed by the removal of any mold lines or sprue tabs. But before we assemble him, I want to remove the Black Templar's iconography. I begin this process by shaving away chunks of plastic with a sharp knife, being very careful not to cut too deep, and also being very out of focus apparently. Anyways, then using a scraping motion with a dull knife, I carefully trace around all the creases and curves in the fabric, knocking down any sharp bits I find, and rounding out any parts that don't look very natural. Now, real quick, before you curse me in the comments, I just want you to know that I've ordered sanding sticks. Don't kill me, please. They just haven't arrived yet. So once that chest is about as smooth as my brain, we can go ahead and attach the cloth to the front of the body. For this conversion, we're not going to be using the Templar's raised arm stance. I mean, you totally could, but I'm not going to. But you could, but I'm going to cut this off. With that dismemberment complete, we can go ahead and assemble the rest of the body. Before moving on to the next part, I figured now would be a good time to pick out the bits I want from the Blade Guard Captain Sprue. One of those bits was going to be the enclosed helmet, but it looks like I've used that for a different conversion already. Ultimately, it doesn't have to be the Captain's helmet. You can use any Blade Guard helmet for this conversion. I think the ancient Blade Guard helmet would have actually looked pretty cool on this. But I digress. The bits I collected from the sprue are the backpack, the sword arm, and the relic storm shield. Which, I don't know if you knew this, I certainly didn't, but this thing is way bigger than the standard Blade Guard storm shield. Which is awesome, it's exactly the size I need for this conversion to work. Now to get the pose that I wanted for my captain, I opted to use this Blade Guard veteran arm. But I do want to make it clear that the raised sword arm the Marshal is originally supposed to have will still work with this conversion. So if you don't have any Assault Intercessor or Blade Guard weapon arms lying about, you can still get this conversion done with just the Templar and the Primaris captain. I also took this opportunity to pick out a shoulder pad that would be suitable for my chapter. Here I picked out the Iron Hands Gravis shoulder pad. Now I could tell immediately that a lot of work is going to need to be done if I want that new arm and shoulder pad to fit. So I get to work cutting away at the Blade Guard's shoulder, making careful and precise trims after each test fit until the arm sits in place naturally. Happy with how that looks, I can now start the hard part, which will be shaping the cape so it conforms with the new shoulder pad that I've got. The Marshal's original shoulder pad shape was very different to the classic shape I'm using, which means it sits far too high for the Gravis shoulder pad to go on. So I start trimming it down piece by piece, test fitting after each cut, all while being careful to make sure the cape still flows naturally and that edge is still flat, so it doesn't look out of place in the areas that I've cut. Once I find the shape I'm looking for, I start scraping with a dull knife to kind of blend together the areas that are cut and the areas that were untouched. Once I was happy with how things were looking, I started trimming away the Iron Hand symbol on that shoulder pad. The first step was to, of course, take away most of the plastic using a sharp knife. And once it's reasonably flat, start smoothing things out by scraping with a dull knife, or maybe sanding sticks, I guess. Just be careful not to spend too long scraping or sanding at a single angle. Kind of rotate the blade around or the sanding stick around as you're going to avoid making flat areas on the shoulder pad. I guess I am being a little bit presumptuous thinking you would be a big dum-dum like me and pick a shoulder pad that has an emblem that needs to be removed. With that looking pretty good, there is only one more step I need to do before the sword arm is complete, which was probably completely unnecessary, but I thought the Blade Guard Captain sword was a little bit more intense than the standard Blade Guard sword. It had a little bit more size and, in my opinion, a far greater presence. So I cut both swords off just above the hand, being very, very careful not to damage either arm. And then being as accurate as I possibly could, I drilled out the center of the Marine's hand and also the center of the sword, before pinning both pieces together with a relatively thick piece of wire. Now be honest with me, do you think that was worth it, or do you think I should have just stuck with the Blade Guard sword? I personally think it made quite a nice difference, so I stuck everything together with oceans of plastic glue and set the whole mini down to dry for a while. So while that's drying, we can begin work on the relic storm shield. So because we want the captain wielding the storm shield rather than leaning on it, that hand at the top has to go. I begin very crudely removing sections with the clippers. And once most of the plastic is gone, I start slicing away with a sharp knife, carving until the area conforms with the rest of the storm shield, like the hand was never even there. And once I've made a few polishes using a dull knife, I try using the back of a blade to re-groove some of the detail on the front of the storm shield. With the hand successfully removed from the storm shield, we can begin work on the front. Now what you could do with this is attach the skeleton that was originally meant to go on the storm shield. This would be far easier than what I'm about to do, and it would still look pretty good. But for my captain, I wanted him to have a storm shield with multiple armor layers. To achieve this, I would be using one of those mini storm shields from the Vanguard Veteran kit. However, in order to combine these two pieces, I would have to remove the detail from the front of the Blade Guard Captain's shield. This would be achieved using a combination of clipping, sanding, slicing, and scraping. Once all the pieces that look exposed are reasonably flat, I clip away the hand on the back of the Vanguard shield, and I sand down the raised edges so it sits more flush onto the relic shield. Once that is attached, I use purity seals to cover up the rough spots because that is literally why they exist. And also because I thought it would be nice to pay homage to the original Storm Shield design because it had purity seals in a very similar location. While that is drying, I turn my attention to the back of the shield where there was a push to fit hole where the hand used to be. So I mix together a little bit of milliput and shove it in the hole, cutting away the excess until it blends reasonably well with the rest of the shield. My milliput skills are still being worked on, guys, but I don't think this looks too bad. So the next step will be removing the handle from the back of the shield since the captain's hand will have to be there. This is done reasonably easy with a little bit of clipping and cutting. If you keep in mind that it doesn't have to look very neat given that a hand will be covering it, it makes the ordeal a little bit less stressful. Once that is complete, we can grab the captain arm that we had liberated the sword from earlier in the video. Because the hand was originally holding a sword hilt, it can easily be repurposed into one that looks like it's wielding a shield. So once I've flattened out the top of his forearm, I test fit his hand against the shield and I feel pretty happy about the results. But I don't glue it on just yet because I want to make sure I find the right angle for both the shield and the arm. I begin this process by supergluing a blob of green stuff to the body, and then I kind of smush the shield arm into the green stuff until I get the rough angle I'm looking for. Now I recognize there are better ways I could have done that, but it worked out in the end, so yeah. Given that the angle of the shield was one of the more important aspects of this conversion, I decided to put him on the base before the green stuff dries just to be sure it looks natural. Now for his base, I still use the tactical rock the Marshal comes with, but I end up flipping it around so the jagged bits face forwards rather than backwards. Now that he's facing away, you'd think that I'd cut off those nubs on the bottom of his feet since they don't slot into the rock anymore. But I actually keep them attached so that I can use them to prop him forward a little bit, because what I'm going for is more of a bracing position, as if he is preparing to be attacked by a worthy opponent. You will notice this leaves a pretty significant gap between his feet and the rock, but don't worry about that, I'll address it in just a moment. Because first, I want to angle him forward just a few degrees. To achieve this, I grab a very thin piece of cork, and I fix it to the back of the base using superglue. Satisfied of the angle this would give the captain, I finally glued him into place, using plastic glue for the front of the rock which is in contact with the base, and superglue for the bits that were in contact with the cork. With the captain finally in position, I feel confident to also glue down the storm shield, right before using my questionable methods to remove any excess green stuff. Now the captain is really taking shape and there's only a few more things left for us to do. One of those things being the attachment of the backpack. Because of the conflicting connection points, the tab on the Marshal's back will have to be removed, as well as the push to fit pin on the Blade Guard Captain's Powerpack. With that done, there's nothing stopping us from gluing down the Powerpack. Just be sure to get the right angle. My strange method to achieving this is to align the pack vertically to where I imagine the Marine's spine would be. With that looking pretty snazzy, we can take the next step and attach the head. Like I said earlier, I really wanted to use the Blade Guard Captain head for this, but since I don't seem to have one, the Blade Guard Lieutenant head's gonna have to do. And the second I glued that head down, I thought this guy would look so cool painted as Imperial Fist. but I also thought this helmet just doesn't quite represent my chapter enough. So I made this little addition which suits my chapter, but it would also be great for Iron Hands. That being the addition of this little cogtooth plume, taken from the helmet of a Skitarii. And once that was glued down, the one thing left to do was to pack the base with a bit of drywall filler, being sure to fill in any gaps, including the ones below his feet. And now with the conversion complete, I just want to express that I think this dude looks badass. Like, honestly, Jesus Christ. And I also want to reiterate that most of this conversion can be done with just a Blade Guard Captain and the Black Templar's Marshal. If you don't have an Assault Intercessor arm or a Blade Guard Veteran arm to use, you can most definitely get away with just using the Templar's original arm. I do hope this video was reasonably easy to follow along with, because I would love to see what you guys can come up with by following this conversion guide. Now for the next section of this video, I decided to film myself painting, which was definitely a learning experience. So if it looks awkward, that's because it very much was. So while I subject your eyes to this unrefined torture, I'm going to share with you a little bit of lore on this channel's Space Marine chapter. The Iron Angels differ from most Astartes chapters for many reasons. Core among these reasons is their devout worship of the Emperor. You may believe this means the chapter would be similar to the Black Templars as a result of their beliefs. But the truth is, while these two chapters have a good relationship due to their shared faith, the Iron Angels' worship is more akin to that of the Adeptus Mechanicus. These Astartes are followers of the Machine God, though officially labeled by the Administratum to be Sons of the Lion. Inconclusive gene seed test and a chapter-wide affinity for technology has led many brothers to believe that they belong to a completely different gene lineage. They believe themselves descended from the Gorgon himself, Ferrus Menace. This belief has always divided the chapter, resulting in long debates inside their fortress monastery to conflicting tactics on the battlefield. While some companies, such as the 2nd and the 4th, would favor tactics used by the Iron Hands, the captain of the venerable 5th would see his brothers fight as sons of Caliban. Just like all captains of the Iron Angels, the captain of the 5th has also undergone his 20-year tenure on Holy Mars, and is as much a follower of the Omnissiah as any of his brothers. But despite this, he remains steadfast in his beliefs that he carries the legacy of the lion within his veins, with flesh crafted by the Emperor, and martial prowess passed down by his firstborn son. This captain has cast aside Servoarm in faith of his sword arm. This is Achaeus Nasuk, captain of the 5th Company Iron Angels.